Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're venturing into the fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty perplexing world of Johnny Mack's Passport to the Cosmos, Human Transformation, and Alien Encounters.
Yeah, it's quite a text.
Our mission is basically to unpack the core ideas of this, well, renowned Harvard psychiatrist who took a really controversial turn in his research.
It's quite a journey, isn't it? I mean, here's someone who was firmly planted in established academia before, well, pivoting hard.
Totally. Johnny Mack, professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He even won a Pulitzer Prize for his biography of T.E. Lawrence.
Right, and his earlier work wasn't light stuff either. He was looking into nightmares, human conflict, the psychological effects of the Holocaust, the nuclear age, serious mainstream concerns.
Exactly. This background is so important, you know. It really highlights how significant his later shift was. He wasn't some outsider from the start.
No, absolutely not. Deeply embedded. So when he started looking into alien encounters back in the early 90s, it was a real departure.
And apparently, he started out skeptical, thinking he'd find psychological issues.
That's right. He initially suspected conventional explanations, but then, and this is key, he said he found little evidence of serious mental illness in the people reporting these things. And he was apparently encouraged, notably by Thomas Kuhn, the philosopher of science.
Oh, interesting connection.
Yeah, encouraged to follow the data, wherever it led, even if it meant facing some serious heat from colleagues.
Which definitely happened. That path led straight to his 1994 bestseller, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens.
That book really put him on the map, controversy-wise. It presented these case studies and basically suggested these experiences had some kind of reality.
And you can imagine the reaction, a Harvard psychiatrist giving credence to abduction stories. That really ruffled feathers in the academic world.
Big time. The resistance was intense.
Which led to that pretty unprecedented investigation by Harvard Medical School into his research. I mean, that was huge.
Absolutely remarkable. And Passport to the Cosmos, which came out in '99, feels like his response, doesn't it? A continuation, digging deeper into the meaning of it all, after all that controversy.
Okay, so what's the central argument in Passport? This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Well, Mack basically argues that, look, whether or not these alien abduction experiences are literally physically true in the way we normally think of truth, they are powerfully real experiences for the people involved, subjectively real. And then he takes this big leap.
Which is?
He claims these experiences demand that we fundamentally rethink our whole Western worldview, especially its heavy reliance on, well, materialism. Our assumptions about reality, consciousness.
He called it a cosmic wake-up call, right?
Yeah.
Suggesting there's much more going on in the universe than our science currently admits.
Exactly. But, and this is important context for you to understand, Mack already had doubts about pure materialism.
Okay. This wasn't totally out of the blue for him philosophically.
Not entirely. He felt materialism had limitations, maybe even contributed to global problems. He was already interested in what's called a transpersonal worldview, drawing from things like Eastern spiritual traditions, ideas about reality beyond just the physical.
So his existing beliefs might have shaped how he interpreted these abduction accounts.
It's definitely something to consider. Themes like transformation, spiritual awakening, ecological awareness, connection to a cosmic intelligence, these were already on his radar. So it's possible he saw these experiences not just as weird anomalies, but maybe as evidence or even catalysts for the very shift in thinking he already believed was necessary.
Okay, let's really unpack that challenge to materialism. You said it's a cornerstone of Passport.
It really is. He argues that Western science, with its focus on what you can measure and observe physically, well, that framework just isn't equipped to handle things like alien encounters.
Because they seem to break the rules of physics as we know them.
Kind of. They often involve aspects that defy our normal understanding of space, time, physical limits. So Mack is pushing us, asking, are our scientific tools maybe too limited for certain kinds of reality? Do we need new ways to understand?
And he thought the resistance to this wasn't just intellectual.
No, he suggested something deeper, a kind of fear, maybe. Fear of the unknown. He called it ontological shock.
Ontological shock. Explain that a bit.
Think about it like this. Imagine everything you thought you knew about how the universe works suddenly gets turned upside down. That profound disorientation, that shattering of your basic reality framework, that's ontological shock. He felt people resist these ideas partly to avoid that feeling.
Okay. Now, about the reality of the abductions themselves, you said he was careful with his wording.
Very careful. He wasn't out there saying, yep, Physical aliens, physical ships every time.
Right.
He always stressed the profound subjective reality, how incredibly real and impactful these experiences felt to the experiencers. He'd say things like he was convinced the phenomenon was real in some way.
But not necessarily nuts and bolts real.
Exactly. He avoided claiming it was real in a strictly material sense or purely literal. Some critics felt he was deliberately, fudging the issue of physical proof.
Instead, he talks about events that manifest in the material world but seem not to be of it. That's a mind bender.
It is. He's suggesting the line between physical and non-physical might be blurrier than we think. Maybe these encounters have physical effects like sightings, missing time, even marks on the body. But their origin isn't necessarily physical. Maybe it's transdimensional or something else entirely.
Which explains why he thought demanding only physical proof was missing the point.
Precisely. If the phenomena isn't entirely physical, then demanding only physical evidence might be, as he put it, largely useless. You risk ignoring the psychological, the spiritual, maybe the most significant parts of the experience.
And to bolster this idea, he looked outside Western science, right, towards indigenous cultures.
Yes, that's a really interesting part of Passport. He explored cosmologies, worldviews from non-Western and indigenous traditions that often readily accept multiple dimensions, interactions with non-human beings, reality being more layered.
Like shamanism.
Exactly. He saw parallels between modern abduction accounts and things like shamanic journeys, encounters with spirits or entities. He felt these traditions might hold keys to understanding that Western materialism just discards.
Did he actually talk to people from these traditions?
He did. He includes interviews with indigenous healers and shamans, names like Bernardo Peixoto from Brazil, Sequoia Trueblood, Vusumazulu Credo Mutwa from South Africa.
Wow.
He presents their perspectives as potentially offering valuable insights, challenging the idea that this is all just, a product of Western sci-fi movies.
It does feel like he's strategically trying to reframe what reality even means here.
I think that's a fair assessment. By separating the subjective reality, which he could validate clinically as a psychiatrist, from the need for physical proof, he could acknowledge the profound impact on people, the trauma, the transformation, without getting stuck in the endless, often fruitless debate about physical evidence.
So the focus shifts. Less, did little green men land? And more.
More, what did this experience do to this person's consciousness? How did it change their view of the world, of themselves, of the cosmos? It's a shift towards phenomenology, the study of experience itself, and towards meaning.
And within these experiences, you mentioned a duality, often starting with trauma.
Yes, that's crucial. Mack doesn't downplay the fear. The reports often involve intense terror, paralysis, feeling violated, undergoing invasive procedures, even perceived sexual interactions. He lays that out.
But then
He argues that very trauma frequently becomes a catalyst. It triggers positive transformation, spiritual growth. He saw this transformation as an intrinsic part of the phenomenon, not just a side effect.
And this is linked to that ontological shock idea again.
Exactly. That shattering experience forces a reevaluation. Mack documented a whole range of outcomes. People feeling more spiritual, developing a sense of expanded awareness, feeling connected to the universe or a source.
Source.
Yeah, a term many experiencers used, a feeling of unity with everything, sometimes equated with God. Also, a big increase in ecological concern, changing life priorities. Some even reported developing psychic abilities.
And the aliens themselves, how are they perceived in this context?
It varied, sometimes still terrifying, but often evolving. They might be seen as intermediaries, messengers from that source. Relationships could become complex telepathic communication, intense eye contact leading to deep connection, sometimes even feelings of love despite the initial trauma.
So for Mack, the transformation was the key message, the purpose.
It seems that way.
Well,
He interpreted the psychospiritual growth sparked by the ontological shock as maybe the whole point. Like the encounters were a kind of intervention designed to expand human consciousness.
so the ecological warnings, for example. The method isn't aliens fixing the planet, but humans changing internally because of the experience.
That's his interpretation. The method is psycho-spiritual growth, leading to broader awareness and responsibility. And, this aligns perfectly with his pre-existing ideas about needing a more transpersonal, less materialistic worldview.
Let's talk more about those ecological warnings. That was a really consistent theme, you said.
Extremely consistent. Many experiencers reported receiving urgent messages about Earth's environment, deforestation, pollution, waste, the whole thing.
With a sense of gravity.
Oh, yeah. often portraying humanity as dangerously self-destructive. Mack definitely saw this as a core part of that cosmic wake-up call, a push towards environmental stewardship.
And did it have an effect on the experiencers?
Apparently so. He noted many developed a much stronger concern for the environment, sometimes becoming activists. And he drew parallels here with Native American traditions and their reverence for nature.
Okay, now, the really controversial part, the hybrid project.
Yeah, this is where it gets particularly strange and, for many, deeply disturbing. Reports of reproductive procedures taking sperm, alpha,
Right.
and then later encounters with beings perceived as human-alien hybrids.
And the reasons given for this.
They varied in the accounts. Sometimes it was about the aliens' survival, maybe their race was dying out, or they lacked emotions and needed human genes. Sometimes it was supposedly for our survival, creating beings adapted for a future Earth. Or maybe creating a whole new species altogether.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. Mack acknowledged how bizarre and unsettling these accounts were, and this theme definitely connects with the work of other researchers, like David Jacobs, who focused heavily on it.
Were there other messages reported besides ecology and hybrids?
Mack mentions warnings about nuclear weapons cropping up. He also notes, citing other researchers, claims about aliens wanting humanity to release suppressed technologies. And interestingly, despite the invasive procedures, some experiencers apparently describe certain sexual encounters with the beings in positive terms, which adds another layer of complexity.
Okay, the consistency of these themes, ecology, hybrids, it does make you wonder about influences, doesn't it? Like, are these reflecting societal anxieties?
That's a really important question. Environmental fears, worries about our future, genetics, these are definitely big themes in our culture. So where do these narratives come from? Are they purely from the encounters or shaped by our existing fears and stories?
And Mack himself had strong ecological concerns beforehand.
Right. So could there have been a feedback loop? Did his interests subtly shape the interviews? Critics certainly raised that possibility.
The hybrid theme also feels archetypal somehow.
It does tap into deep myths about creation, gods and mortals, the other. And critics jumped on this too, suggesting cultural contamination maybe from sci-fi, maybe from mythology itself.
And what about the therapy process itself? Hypnosis, suggestion?
Big point of criticism. Researchers like Elizabeth Loftus warned hypnosis can increase suggestibility, potentially creating or distorting memories. Could the therapist, even unintentionally, be co-creating the narrative?
How did Mack counter that?
His main argument was the consistency. He stressed that similar stories emerged from people all over the world. People who hadn't read the same books or seen the same movies, people with no contact with each other. He felt that pointed to something real underlying it all.
But the debate is what that underlying something is.
Exactly. Is it a shared external reality? Or a shared psychological or archetypal process? Or something else? It really highlights this complex mix. The person's own mind, cultural influences, the interview setting, the investigator's own beliefs. It's messy.
Which brings us squarely to Mack's methodology, how he actually did this research.
Right. His main tool was the in-depth clinical interview, really listening to the person's subjective experience. He fundamentally believed this phenomenon wouldn't yield its secrets to standard scientific methods.
Why not?
He felt it required different ways of knowing. He used terms like meditative, intuitive, contemplative, intersubjective. He thought the most powerful evidence wasn't lab data, but his own clinical judgment and the patterns he saw across many cases.
And he did use hypnosis sometimes.
Yes, hypnosis and relaxation techniques were part of his toolkit, used to help people access memories or deeper states of awareness connected to the experiences.
Okay. And the scientific community's reaction to this approach was not positive.
Largely, no. The core criticism was the lack of scientific rigor. Where were the testable hypotheses, objective measurements, control groups, replication?
The basics of scientific method.
Pretty much. So many dismissed his work as non-scientific, even pseudoscientific. They worried about relying so heavily on subjective stories, which can be unreliable confabulation, false memories, especially with hypnosis involved.
The Elizabeth Loftus critique again.
Exactly. Critics felt Mack might have underestimated how much his own presence, his questions, his use of hypnosis could have shaped what people remembered or reported.
And the cultural contamination argument, like people absorbing ideas from the X-Files or something.
That was definitely raised. How do you separate a genuine anomalous experience from something influenced by pop culture? Carl Sagan famously took Mack to task on this, essentially saying, you can't ask for scientific acceptance if you don't play by science's rules.
So how did Mack defend himself against these methodological criticisms?
Well, his main defense was, again, that the phenomenon itself demanded a different approach. He pointed to the consistency across diverse people with no apparent connection. He stressed that most experiencers showed no signs of major mental illness, which argued against simple delusion. He saw the transformations people underwent as powerful data in themselves, showing the profound reality of something happening.
And he stood by subjective experience as a valid way of knowing.
Absolutely, especially for things involving consciousness, meaning, and potentially non-material aspects. And he kept pointing to those cross-cultural parallels as evidence against it being just a Western fad.
So it really boils down to a fundamental disagreement about what counts as evidence and how we investigate something so strange.
Totally. It's an epistemological clash, a conflict about how we know what we know. Mack prioritized the depth of subjective experience and meaning. Science demands objective, verifiable, falsifiable data. His approach made his core claims largely unfalsifiable by conventional science, and that's the crux of the whole controversy.
What about the reception of Passport to the Cosmos specifically when it came out?
It was pretty mixed, as you might expect. General reviews often called it intriguing, thought-provoking, but often added it raised more questions than answers, lacked scientific proof, maybe felt more like New Age philosophy than science. That criticism about him fudging the physical reality question came up again.
Were there positive takes?
Oh, yes. People praised his compassion for the experiencers, his articulate writing, the philosophical depth. It definitely got media attention.
And how did different groups react? UFO believers versus scientists?
Predictably different. Spiritual communities, consciousness researchers, and certainly the experiencer community often found it validating, important work. Mainstream science groups like SETI, they remained deeply skeptical, saying the physical evidence just wasn't there.
We can't really talk about Passport without going back to that Harvard investigation that happened before it was published after abduction. That was such a big deal.
A huge deal, and totally unprecedented for a Harvard Medical School investigating a tenured professor, not for fraud or misconduct, but for his research methods on a controversial topic.
Who initiated it?
The dean at the time, Daniel Tosteson, he appointed a confidential committee led by Arnold Relman, a former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine.
And it got messy. Leaks.
Yeah, details leaked, leading to accusations. It was a witch hunt. People like Alan Dershowitz raised concerns about academic freedom.
What did the committee reportedly find or criticize?
Leaked parts of their draft report were very critical. They apparently felt Mack relied on unsubstantiated UFO reports, that it was professionally irresponsible to suggest the experiences might be literally real, and they questioned if his methods were rational and scholarly.
Ouch. But what was the final outcome? Did he lose his job?
No. In the end, Harvard reaffirmed his academic freedom. He kept his tenure.
There's always a but.
But it came with a letter of concern from the dean, and the committee did conclude his methods weren't rational and scholarly and recommended changes.
Yeah.
Mack, however, remained, as they say, undaunted. He kept going.
It really throws that tension between academic freedom and disciplinary standards into sharp relief, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Harvard defended his right to study at the what, but heavily criticized how he studied at the how.
And did it affect his reputation long-term, even though he was cleared?
Oh, definitely. Among many academic colleagues, his standing took a hit. Relman himself reportedly said Mack wouldn't be taken seriously by most scientists afterwards. And there was that later incident where a journalist faked an abduction story and fooled him. That probably didn't help his credibility in mainstream circles either. He became increasingly seen as operating on the fringes.
It shows exploring the unconventional, even with academic freedom, can cost you credibility within your field.
It's the risk you take, I suppose.
So let's try to sum up Passport to the Cosmos. It's Mack's big statement after the abduction storm, focusing more on meaning and philosophy.
That's a good way to put it. He doubles down on challenging materialism, validating the subjective reality and the transformations, highlighting those themes of ecology and hybridization, and bringing in cross-cultural ideas. It's really a philosophical argument for a paradigm shift.
But it didn't silence the critics or solve the mystery.
Not at all. The core tension remained. Respected Harvard professor lends weight to extraordinary claims using methods science found wanting. No definitive proof was offered. The nature of abduction remains, well, enigmatic. Mack's work is one powerful but highly contested voice in that mystery.
So looking back, what's his legacy? What did he contribute?
Well, he undeniably dragged the abduction topic into mainstream discussion like never before. That's huge. For experiencers, he was incredibly important, providing validation, reducing isolation, giving them a serious platform.
And within psychiatry or psychology?
He pushed boundaries there too, made people grapple with questions about trauma, memory, consciousness, the limits of our models. And philosophically, his challenge to materialism continues to resonate in certain circles.
So the final verdict, pioneer or pariah, or somewhere in between?
It's so complex, isn't it? You can absolutely see the pioneer angle.
Yeah.
Courageous, willing to risk everything, compassionate, determined against institutional pressure.
But the other side.
The other side sees a brilliant mind, maybe led astray, departing from the rigor that science demands, potentially getting too close to his subject.
And Passport embodies that tension.
Perfectly. Compelling insights into subjective worlds, but scientifically inconclusive, methodologically controversial. Where you land on Mack Pioneer or Cautionary Tale probably says as much about your own views on knowledge and evidence as it does about him. His work definitely keeps asking uncomfortable, essential questions.
Wow. This deep dive into John Mack's Passport to the Cosmos really leaves you with a lot to chew on. We've covered his big challenge to materialism that focused on subjective reality and transformation and all the controversy around his methods.
It really forces you to ask, doesn't it? What is reality, actually? How do we even approach experiences that just don't fit our neat boxes? And, how much do our own beliefs shape what we're willing to see or accept?
Yeah, if this discussion sparked your interest, definitely consider exploring further. Reading Passport itself is an experience. Or just looking into the broader world of anomalous experiences and scientific controversies. There's a lot out there.
It makes you think, perhaps the most profound journey isn't always outwards, to the stars, but inwards, that journey sparked when something challenges the very fabric of how you understand everything.